Hi, Nick here from Greenspace Zambia with another one of our My Greenspace videos where we're looking at another indoor plant. These are aglaonema. Aglaonema pictum is the scientific name, commonly referred to as Chinese evergreen actually. And these are in the arum family, Araceae, the aroid family. There's been a lot more breeding work that's been happening with these in the last number of years, basically on foliage. So these are more or less foliage plants. We grow them because of their interesting foliage and ease of growth for that matter too. And they do flower, but the flowers we don't take as much note of. They're greenish to greenish white and not always as apparent underneath the foliage. They grow on stems, these ones, so as they grow and grow older, you can see the stems here as it's grown up quite nice and tall, and they will continue to grow. Now, in nature, they'd have other plants around them that would support. They'll hit a certain point in time if they're growing just on their own like this, where the stems might get too top heavy and start to fall over. And in that case, it can be staked, or you can cut them back and let them reshoot. They'll reshoot from the stems and even from the base of the plant to form a more kind of clumped plant. As we can see on this variety here, it's got this kind of silverish white variegation in there with little dots or splashes of green within that. Now, in slightly lower light conditions, because these plants can actually take quite a bit of low light, the leaves will get quite a bit broader and become even more luxuriant looking. So that's one of the nice aspects of these, is that when they are in lower light conditions, they actually acclimatize to produce larger leaves that give it a more luxuriant look. The type of variegation predominantly originally was more with this kind of silvery green. So this is a different type with broader and shorter leaves, but again with that kind of silvery grayish variegation in the leaf. Here we have another example of that. And again, with the more silvery gray, but with slightly different patterns between these three in how they then manifest that variegation. Now, these first two have kind of green or brown stems, whereas the nice thing with this is that the petioles on the leaves are actually kind of a light pinkish color. So this is actually kind of a nice attractive feature of the plant then as well. This is another kind of small-leaved type here, which again has that kind of silvery gray variegation in it, but much smaller leaves usually. In darker locations will get a little bigger, but they won't ever reach the sizes of some of these types here. This type, we have it where it's not silvery gray, but more kind of yellowy green, and approaching white in some areas. So this one has a much more kind of speckled appearance to the leaf. A very nice ornamental type that again will also get larger leaves when it's in a slightly darker environment here. However, in more recent times, the focus has been in terms of breeding to try and get other colors within the leaf. So here we have a variety where you can see they have been able to start breeding in pinks. And there are some that even have kind of a nice kind of strong red to the leaf as well. Unfortunately, this type is not as available in Zambia. They're harder to come by and they take time to grow. So we actually just recently acquired this, and I'm looking forward to when it gets to, you know, some of these sizes, because it'll be a striking plant at that point in time. Aglaonema are fairly easy houseplants. They are not succulent by any means, but they are also not, they don't use a lot of water. So on most of these here, we water once a week, once every 2 weeks, depending on what the outside conditions have been. With the rainy season upon us right now, I don't water anything more than every 2 weeks effectively. Again, I just pop my finger into the root ball to see at what level the top bit of soil has dried out. When we hit around that 3 centimeter mark, I definitely give it a water then. If it's not, even if it's only about a centimeter and a half that's dry, I will still wait and then water it the next week. They don't like to be waterlogged. Their roots will rot, and then you have to start over in terms of taking cuttings of the top part. If you're lucky, the base of the plant, the crown, might still be alive and it can resprout from the roots. But if you start getting root rot in there, you kind of have to start over with the cuttings of the plants. And then when you're talking about some of these that are a little bit rarer and more ornamental, you definitely don't want to lose these kinds of plants here. As I said, they're actually quite tolerant of light conditions. They generally do not want direct light. That will usually cause the leaves to start to scorch a little bit, even though it might not be for very long. The leaves in those conditions, when it's with direct light, will actually generally tend to be smaller. They're not as impressive, it's not as luxuriant. Anything from indirect light to, a few meters away from the window or from the light source will usually be sufficient. Although the further away it is from the light source, especially if it's unidirectional, coming from only one side, you will most likely have to be turning the plant every so often so it doesn't start to bend towards the light and then you get this kind of one-sided plant. That said, in those conditions, they will grow larger and more impressive leaves up to a point. It might get a bit longer, but a bit wider. But the variegation actually comes out much nicer when those leaves are a little more luxuriant and large. In terms of fertilizing, they are evergreen. So even in the coldest parts of the season, they will remain green, but they're not in active growth. They're just kind of waiting for that better period to resume growth. They don't need to be fertilized unless it is into the growing season. So again, we're looking at anywhere from about September, October through to about March when we would do our fertilization. We look for a nice evenly balanced soluble fertilizer, because although, as I say, they do produce flowers, and there is a little flower on this plant here. I'm just going to pull that off. You can see it is kind of greeny yellow. Sometimes they might come out as being white along the spathe, but most of the time it is this kind of greeny yellow color. And the spadix on the inside is also green. What you might notice, though, is you might not even notice the flowers, but they develop little berries that will ripen to an orange or a red color. And sometimes you might even notice, oh, look, it has berries. And that's just the seeds developing, but that's not very common. I've had that once or twice on any of our plants. But you do have to be careful. In the arum family, there are a number of plants that are inedible. I'll say inedible and not toxic. You'd have to eat a lot of the plant in order to actually be poisoned by it. But you will definitely not want to eat it because the taste and there will be a burning sensation. They contain oxalate crystals, which will burn your tongue. So you will realize very quickly that this is not something to eat. Same thing with the seeds and the fruits. You will notice the similarities actually between the flower here and some of the other more commonly grown arum family members, things like the peace lily, Spathiphyllum. If you ever notice the flowers on the ZZ plant or even philodendrons or monsteras, they all have the same kind of appearance with the spathe, the kind of leafy bract at the back, and then on the inside, I can just kind of get that. You get the spadix, a kind of long, straight, almost like pencil-like appendage that bears the flowers. So the flowers actually occur on the spadix, and the spathe is just there as an adornment to that, sometimes acting as a means of advertisement and allowing then the plants to attract the pollinators. Overall, aglaonemas are a really fantastic group of indoor plants, well worth growing. They can be grown outdoors in Zambia, but again, they would need shady conditions and fairly moist conditions, not wet, but fairly moist conditions. But I find that you just don't quite appreciate them to the same extent as if they are indoors, where with this kind of bright foliage on some of them, it just adds an extra layer of interest to the plants that we have indoors. So definitely give them a try. You can let us know in the comment section below if you grow aglaonema as houseplants and what you think of them. So we'll see you next time. Cheers.